Welcome to Reformed Thinking.
Glad to be here.
Imagine doing what God commands you to do. You step out in faith, you take a massive risk, you deliver the message, and, well, your reward is that your life instantly falls apart.
Yeah, that is a pretty terrifying scenario.
Right. Today, we are looking at the terrifying reality of divine delay. We are examining what happens when active obedience to the sovereign Lord results in an immediate, catastrophic increase in suffering.
It is a jarring reality to confront, for anyone.
As a fellow student of Scripture, you have probably been in that place where you are seeking clarity on a difficult truth, where the pieces just, they do not seem to fit together.
Yeah, we all assume obedience equals immediate blessing.
Absolutely. But today, we are going to look at a narrative that shatters the assumption that faith guarantees an easy life. We are doing a deep dive into Exodus chapter 5, looking at specifically verses 22 and 23.
Yeah, and when we look at those verses, we see Moses hitting a theological and, honestly, a psychological wall.
Oh, for sure. He has just obeyed God's command. He went to Pharaoh. He delivered the message. And instead of a glorious victory, the result is that the Israelite people are crushed under an even heavier burden of slavery.
It is a total disaster on paper.
Before we get into the heavy theology of Moses' reaction and his bitter prayer to God, we really need to set the historical stage.
Yeah, the context is everything here.
Right. What was the actual situation on the ground in Egypt that pushed Moses to such a breaking point? Because you cannot fully grasp the theological crisis until you understand the historical pressure cooker of 1446 BC.
That date, 1446 BC, that puts us right in the middle of the 18th dynasty of Egypt.
So who are we talking about here?
We are talking about the era of pharaohs, like Thutmose III and his successor, Amenhotep II.
Okay.
And this was an era defined by aggressive military expansion into the Levant and, monumental architecture back home in the Nile Valley.
So Egypt is basically at the zenith of its international dominance at this point.
Spot on. The wealth pouring into the capital is just staggering, and that wealth is being converted into massive building projects, specifically storage cities and temples in the Delta region.
And in this society, Pharaoh is not just a political figurehead sitting in a chair with a gold crown, right?
No, not at all.
Yeah.
The theology of Egypt dictates that he is viewed as the living embodiment of the god Horus.
Wow.
Yeah, he is the supreme celestial lord of Egypt, and he's tasked with maintaining Mat, which is their concept of cosmic order and truth.
That theological context makes Pharaoh's reaction to Moses make perfect sense, honestly.
It really does. When Moses walks in and says, "Thus says Yahweh, the God of Israel, let my people go," he is not just bringing up a labor dispute.
Right, it's not a union negotiation.
No, he is introducing a competing deity into a closed theological system.
I see. So Pharaoh's defiant question, who is the Lord?
Yeah.
That is a total assertion of pagan self-deification.
Precisely. In his administrative system, the worship of Yahweh is treated as an attack on cosmic order. It is treated as laziness.
Yeah. He is essentially saying, I am the only God here, and your desire to worship another God is just a pathetic excuse to avoid your quotas.
That is his entire mindset, yeah.
So the socio-political reality for the Hebrew people was brutal, state-sanctioned enslavement. The entire system was designed to crush their demographic growth and exploit their labor.
And we have extra-biblical confirmation of how this specific supply chain system operated. We are not just guessing about ancient Egyptian brickmaking operations.
We actually have documents about this.
We do. We have incredible primary sources. Ancient Egyptian documents, specifically the papyrus Anastasi 3 and 5, confirm the meticulous administrative control the Egyptians maintained over labor quotas.
That is fascinating.
Yeah, these papyri are essentially the ancient equivalent of middle management spreadsheets.
Oh, I love that.
The scribes tracked raw materials down to the smallest detail. They specifically detail the logistics of mud brick making and the absolute necessity of straw.
Let's look at the mechanics behind that tactic for a second, because withholding straw while maintaining the daily brick quota was not just, random cruelty.
No, it was a calculator.
It was a calculated administrative death sentence. I want to pull the thread on the actual chemistry and logistics of this. Mud bricks in the Nile Delta required straw because as the straw decays in the mud, it releases lactic acid, right?
That is correct.
And that acid chemically binds the clay and the sand together, making the brick exponentially stronger and preventing it from shrinking and cracking in the sun.
That is precisely how the chemistry worked. The Egyptians had a highly optimized supply chain. Typically, the state provided the chopped straw from the agricultural fields directly to the brickyards.
Okay.
The Hebrews would mix the mud, form the bricks, and meet a specific daily tally. So when Pharaoh abruptly cuts off the straw supply, he forces the slaves to go find their own stubble.
Which takes hours, right?
Oh, finding stubble takes hours. Gathering it takes hours. Transporting it back to the brickyard takes hours. But the required tally of finished bricks remains identical.
That is insane. So Pharaoh does not just increase the workload, he actively dismantles their ability to gather together.
Yeah, think about it. If you have to scour the entire countryside to find your own straw, you cannot stay in one place.
You are totally scattered.
Scattered everywhere. And that structural isolation does what Pharaoh hoped it would do. It dismantles any attempt at corporate gathering or worship.
Right. By scattering the workforce, he eliminates the threat of organized rebellion and completely disrupts their ability to function as a unified people.
It creates a structural impossibility. The Israelite foremen, the officers who were placed over the work crews by the Egyptian taskmasters, they are totally trapped.
Yeah.
They are caught between Pharaoh's impossible demands and the physical limitations of their own people. The people simply cannot make the bricks without the materials, and the foreman cannot report a lower tally without facing brutal physical punishment.
I think about this like a modern hostile corporate takeover.
Okay, let's hear it.
Imagine new management comes in and maliciously cuts a department's operating budget to zero. Oh, brutal.
Right, they take away all the software, all the resources, all the support staff. But they look the department head in the eye and demand the exact same quarterly deliverables with the threat of severe penalties if they fail.
They explicitly design the situation to break the workers' spirits and force a collapse.
It is impossible by design.
And that impossible design breaks the Israelite officers. They go to Pharaoh to appeal the decision, assuming it is just, a mid-level management error.
They think reason will win out.
Right. But Pharaoh laughs them out of the court, reiterating that they are just lazy. So the foremen leave the palace, they get beaten by the taskmasters, and who is standing outside waiting for them?
Moses and Aaron.
Moses and Aaron. And this is where the betrayal happens. The foremen realize Pharaoh will not listen, so they turn all their anger, all their despair directly onto Moses.
They curse him.
Yeah. They say, "May the Lord look upon you and judge you, because you have made us stink in the sight of Pharaoh." That betrayal, that rejection by his own people, is the catalyst that pushes Moses out of the public eye and into this incredibly dark, private confrontation with God.
The psychological weight on Moses in that specific instance is crushing. I mean, he left the wilderness, confronted the most powerful ruler on earth, and the only tangible result is that his own people are being beaten and are now invoking the judgment of Yahweh upon him.
It's just devastating.
Which brings us to the actual text of his bitter prayer in verse 22. The Hebrew grammar here is fascinating and reveals the severe theological crisis happening in his mind.
Let's get into the mechanics of that grammar, because this is where things get really intense. Moses physically retreats to pray. The Hebrew uses the vav consecutive with the qual imperfect verb shav, which indicates an immediate narrative sequence.
Meaning he does not hesitate.
Right, he turns straight to God. He does not sleep on it. He does not go back to the drawing board to strategize. He goes straight from being cursed to throwing this reality back in God's face.
Despite his confusion, his default orientation is to seek the Lord. That is a crucial point in his favor, to be fair.
Good point.
But the manner of his address is where things get incredibly tense. Moses addresses God as Adonai, which means sovereign master, rather than using the covenant name YHVH or Yahweh, which God had just revealed to him at the burning bush in chapter 3.
Wait, so Moses calls God Adonai here instead of YHVH?
Yeah, he does.
That seems like a massive step backward. I mean, God just spent all this time giving him this beautifully intimate covenant name, the I am, WHOIM, and Moses is reverting to sovereign master.
It is a huge regression.
It almost sounds like he is viewing God the same way the Israelites view Pharaoh, just another harsh taskmaster who demands a quota but refuses to provide the resources.
That is the psychological trap he has fallen into. By using Adonai, Moses loses sight of the covenant intimacy. He is viewing God only through the lens of raw, unyielding authority.
He's gone totally administrative.
Yeah, he is speaking to God as a frustrated servant to a harsh master who has failed to protect the household, rather than as a mediator speaking to the faithful, covenant-keeping God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
So the relational warmth is completely gone, replaced by a cold accusation.
Absolutely.
Huh.
And then he uses the interrogative word lama, meaning why, twice in rapid succession.
Why have you caused evil, and why did you send me?
Let's look closely at that first why, because the grammatical stem he uses is shocking. The Hebrew verb is haraota, which translates to thou hast caused evil.
Oh, wow.
It is in the causative himtiful stem. Moses does not use a passive voice to say evil has happened. He deliberately uses the causative stem to assign direct blame.
I need to use an analogy to explain the feeling of this grammar because the hintful stem makes this so aggressive.
Go for it.
In English, it is the difference between saying, a car crash happened on the highway today, and looking someone directly in the eye and saying, you drove the car into the wall.
Spot on analogy.
Moses is not using the passive voice. He is pointing a theological finger squarely at God's chest and saying, you actively caused this evil.
He is laying the ultimate causality of the suffering directly at God's feet. And then he uses the same root word, hera, meaning he hath done evil, aimed at Pharaoh in the next verse.
So he is drawing a direct parallel between the evil actions of the pagan king and the sovereign decree of God.
Yes. And the climax of this complaint is in verse 23. Moses uses the infinitive absolute construction, hatzel lo hitzalta, which literally translates to delivering thou hast not delivered.
The root word there, natzel, does not just mean a polite assistance, right? We need to clarify what Moses is accusing God of failing to do.
Correct. Moses is not complaining that God did not simply help them, which would use the Hebrew word azar.
Okay.
He uses natzel, which means to snatch away, to plunder, or to violently rescue from the jaws of a beast.
That is a very intense word.
Extremely intense.
Yeah.
By pairing the infinitive absolute with a negative particle, Moses is accusing God of a total, unmitigated failure to execute his promise. He is formally asserting non-intervention.
Wow.
He is saying, you promised a violent rescue and you have delivered absolutely nothing.
Hold on, I have to pause you there. I need to push back on behalf of anyone reading this text today.
Okay, lay it on me.
If I stood up in church on Sunday, walked to the pulpit, and used causative language to blame God for the evil in my life, and accused him of a total failure to deliver on his promises, I would be pulled into the elder's office immediately for borderline blasphemy.
Oh, without a doubt.
Why doesn't God strike Moses down right here? Is Moses crossing a massive theological line?
It is a startling accusation, and yes, it borders on the scandalous.
Mhm.
The key to understanding why God does not strike him down lies in understanding primary and secondary causality.
Break that down for us.
Well, Moses actually grasps God's primary causality correctly. He knows God is sovereign over all events, including the hardening of Pharaoh's heart. Moses knows nothing happens outside the decree of the sovereign master.
Right.
But in this moment, Moses lacks the spiritual maturity to trust God's holy purpose behind the secondary calamity.
So he is attributing the moral weight of the evil directly to the primary decree without understanding the providence governing it.
Accurately stated. And God does not strike him down because God meets the faltering servant with grace.
That is amazing.
God knows the extreme limits of human frailty. He is preparing to reveal his glory in an unprecedented way, even when the servant's theology is fracturing under the pressure of the moment.
Yeah.
God handles Moses' bitter complaint by absorbing the shock of it and answering it with a reaffirmation of the covenant in the very next chapter.
That grammatical breakdown reveals a massive theological crisis in Moses' mind. It forces us to confront how we view God's providence today.
Absolutely.
Moses is doing something that we all do. He falls into the trap of temporal evaluation.
Yeah, judging eternal decrees by passing circumstances.
Exactly. Wait, that is precisely it. He looks at the timeline of a few days and concludes that the eternal plan of salvation has failed.
Temporal evaluation is the default mode of the human heart. We measure the validity of God's promises by the comfort of our present hour. If our current hour is painful, we assume the promise is void.
And the reason this text is so crucial is because it completely dismantles so much of the modern church landscape. I'm thinking specifically about seeker-sensitive pragmatism and the prosperity gospel.
Oh, this text is a nightmare for those movements.
Let's look at how Exodus 5 destroys the mechanics of pragmatism. Pragmatism is built on a feedback loop of human approval and visible metrics.
Right, the whole what works mentality.
The philosophy is if you do strategy A and the crowd likes it and the numbers go up, then God is blessing strategy A. But if the numbers go down, you must be doing something wrong.
By that metric, Moses is a colossal failure. Moses executed perfect obedience. He did what God commanded him to do, using the words God gave him. And the immediate result was not a megachurch gathering in the wilderness.
No, the result was that his entire congregation was beaten, their workload doubled, and they turned against him.
If Moses followed modern pragmatic church growth metrics, he would have quit after his first sermon in Egypt.
He would have fired his staff, rebranded his whole approach, and sent an apology letter to Pharaoh for his offensive tone.
He really would have. He would have concluded that because the results were negative, his calling must have been false.
And the prosperity gospel fares even worse under the weight of this text. The prosperity gospel falsely promises health, wealth, and immediate victory as a guarantee for faith and obedience.
It teaches that if you have enough faith, God is obligated to remove your obstacles.
But here, God intentionally creates the obstacle. God hardens Pharaoh's heart. God orchestrates the delay.
The sociological data on what happens when bad theology meets real suffering is staggering.
It really is. Surveys consistently show that over 60% of professing Christians admit to experiencing severe spiritual crises or leaving the church entirely when faced with prolonged trials, unanswered prayers, or sudden tragedy.
That statistic is a direct reflection of a shallow theology that has not been shaped by texts like Exodus chapter 5.
Yeah.
The Reformed theological framework, specifically articulated in the Westminster Confession of Faith, chapter 5, section 5, teaches something entirely different about the nature of providence.
What does it say?
It states that the most wise, righteous, and gracious God often leaves his children for a season to manifold temptations and the corruptions of their own hearts.
And the purpose of that is not random cruelty, right?
Not at all.
The confession says it is to chastise them for former sins, or to discover unto them the hidden strength of corruption and deceitfulness of their hearts, that they may be humbled. It is to drive them to a deeper reliance on him.
The assumption of modern pragmatism is that human free will determines history, and therefore we must optimize our strategy to get the best human response.
Right.
But the text shows that obedience to the sovereign Lord often leads directly into deeper earthly tribulation, contrary to those assumptions. The delay is the tool God uses to silence human boasting.
I want you, the listener, to consider that 60% statistic for a moment. Think about a time you prayed for something objectively good. Maybe you prayed for a spouse, or for healing from a chronic illness, or for a financial rescue.
We all have those prayers.
And instead of relief, the situation actually got worse the very next day. If the majority of people flee when things get difficult, doesn't that indicate a catastrophic failure in how modern theology prepares believers for sovereign testing?
It is a massive oversight.
We are handing people an umbrella of positive thinking and sending them into a Category 5 hurricane of sovereign providence. When the storm hits, they assume God has abandoned ship.
It is a profound failure of a striking failure of preparation. We have trained people to expect smooth sailing if they follow the rules. But the historical reality of the Christian faith is that obedience often triggers hostility. The tendency to panic when results do not materialize instantly is not just a modern problem.
No, it is ancient.
It was the explicit reason this text was written down in the first place for the ancient Israelites.
We have to consider the original target audience of this document. Moses wrote this narrative, the book of Exodus, during the wilderness wanderings. He is writing for the wilderness generation of Israel.
The people who actually lived through the plagues, the Red Sea crossing, and then spent 40 years walking in circles.
And those original readers were prone to constant murmuring.
Oh, they fell into idolatry at the drop of a hat.
At Kadesh Barnea, at the wilderness of Sin, whenever they lacked water or whenever they missed the garlic and leeks of Egypt, their immediate response was to accuse God of bringing them out to the desert to kill them.
Exodus chapter 5 represents the absolute zero point of the narrative. It is strategically placed right before the magnificent covenant reassurance of Exodus chapter 6, verses 1 through 8.
Where God repeatedly says, I am the Lord, and I will bring you out. I will deliver you. I will redeem you.
So we have to ask the critical question. Why would Moses document his own catastrophic failure of faith?
It's a great question. It is one thing to fail in private. It is another thing entirely to write it down on a scroll and mandate that millions of people read it for millennia.
Right, he documents his own petulant, bitter accusation against God. Why include it?
He did it to execute a work of pastoral humility. Moses is intentionally killing any idolatrous hero worship of himself.
He wants the nation to know that their rescue was not the result of his brilliant leadership.
The narrative proves that human effort, strategic optimization, and charismatic leadership are useless in the work of salvation.
God intentionally lets the situation in Egypt deteriorate so drastically that all human flesh is silenced.
Because if the deliverance happened easily right after Moses' first polite request to Pharaoh, Israel might have attributed their freedom to Moses' great negotiating skills.
They might have assumed it was just a lucky shift in Egyptian political policy.
Right. Without the dark valley of chapter 5, the mountain of chapter 6 loses its theological weight.
It absolutely does.
I want to picture the Israelites in the desert for a moment. They are complaining about their lack of water. They are forming a committee to stone Moses, which they did multiple times.
Yeah, that had her quite a bit.
And then Moses has this text read to them. They are forced to see their own sinful murmuring mirrored perfectly in their leader's failure before Pharaoh.
It holds up a mirror to the entire nation. It teaches them that their continual desire to judge God's long-term faithfulness by their immediate physical comfort is the exact same sin Moses committed in the brickyards of Egypt.
It levels the playing field. Moses is saying, I am just as prone to temporal evaluation as you are. The only hero in this story is Yahweh.
But Moses' inherent frailty, his inability to carry the weight of divine delay without fracturing, highlights a massive deficit in the Old Covenant.
It leaves the reader hungering for a better mediator.
It is crying out for someone who could succeed where Moses failed, someone who could bear the full weight of God's seemingly delayed justice without complaining.
Which brings us to the Christological fulfillment of this entire narrative. We are looking at a tale of two mediators. Moses is a deeply flawed, severely flawed mediator. He stumbles under the mystery of divine delay.
He accuses God of causing evil. He demands answers on his own timetable.
While Christ is the flawless mediator of the new covenant, let's look at the parallel cries of Lama, the why questions, because the contrast is breathtaking.
He really is striking.
Moses looks at his circumstances and asks why God caused evil to the people and why he was sent. Christ, hanging on the cross, cries out the words of Psalm 22, verse 1, my God, why hast thou forsaken me?"
But the theological context and the posture of those cries are entirely different. How so? Contrast their reactions to the anticipation of suffering. Moses retreated in bitter complaint the moment he faced pushback from the foreman. Christ went to the Garden of Gethsemane, facing a far more agonizing prospect than a hostile Pharaoh.
He was facing the unfiltered wrath of the Almighty God.
And yet, he prayed, "Not my will, but thine be done."
When Christ stood before his accusers, when he stood before Annas, Caiaphas, Herod, and Pilate, which is the New Testament equivalent of Pharaoh's hostile administrative court, he did not open his mouth in complaint.
No, he was silent.
He did not accuse God of failing to deliver him.
Moses accused God of causing evil. Christ willingly became a curse for us. Moses complained that God did not violently rescue the people from the physical labor.
While Christ endured actual, terrifying physical and spiritual non-deliverance on the cross, the Father turned his face away so that his elect flock could be eternally delivered.
That substitution is the heart of the gospel.
Think of Moses like a cracked pane of glass. He is a mediator. He lets some light through. You can see the outline of God's character through him.
Yeah.
But under the intense heat of pressure, the glass cracks, and the image of God distorts. Moses misrepresents God's character in his anger.
That is a great visual.
Christ is the flawless, perfect lens. He takes the full, unfiltered heat of God's wrath, the absolute maximum pressure of human suffering, without a single fracture. He perfectly reflects the obedience of a son.
Knowing that Christ has perfectly secured this eternal deliverance alters everything about how we face our own moments of darkness.
It really does.
Christ's perfect obedience is imputed to us, so when our faith falters in the middle of a trial, we are not cast off. We are held by the perfection of the true mediator.
So what does this all mean for you and me today as we go back to our jobs, our families, our local churches? The core lesson here is that delayed deliverance is not denied deliverance.
Amen to that.
We must stop measuring God's eternal faithfulness by our temporary earthly circumstances. We have to train our minds to stop demanding that the sovereign master explain his timeline to us.
Charles Spurgeon put it beautifully when he was preaching on the providence of God. He said, "When we cannot trace God's hand, we must trust his heart."
When we cannot trace God's hand, we must trust his heart. I love that.
Moses could not trace God's hand in the brickyards of Egypt. He could only see the cruelty of the taskmasters. But he needed to trust the heart of the God who spoke from the burning bush.
This application falls heavily on anyone in a position of spiritual leadership. Husbands leading your homes, elders leading a congregation, anyone in a position of spiritual care. You must stand firm under trial with quiet confidence.
You have to refuse to let temporary setbacks dictate your obedience to the word.
Leadership often means bearing the brunt of the misunderstanding when the promised results do not arrive on the expected human schedule.
The people you are leading will panic. They will turn on you, just like the Israelite foreman turned on Moses.
And your job is not to join them in their panic, nor is it to rewrite your theology to accommodate their impatience. Your job is to point them consistently to the unchangeable promises of God.
That is the whole call of leadership right there.
I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. When your circumstances seem to scream that God has abandoned you, do you try to interpret the Bible through the lens of your pain? Or do you force your pain to be interpreted through the lens of God's absolute sovereignty?
That is the big question.
The next time your obedience makes your life harder, the next time you do the right thing and get punished for it, ask yourself, is this the failure of the plan, or is this just the necessary darkness of Exodus 5 before the dawn of Exodus 6? Thank you for joining this session of Reformed Thinking. Keep trusting the Sovereign Lord.